Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to our Friday afternoon series at Manor Road. Our talk today will be on urban beekeeping with Tara. Cities and beekeeping, we don't usually think of them together, but she's going to explain how this works. So, Tara.
Perfect. So I'm Tara. I'm a beekeeper currently located in Muskoka, Ontario, but I also work part-time with Bee Local 416, which is situated in several neighborhoods around Toronto, actually. And so if you want actually to share screen there, I can pull up the slides. So Bee Local 416, we basically, in this presentation, we normally would cover our story, a little bit about honeybee biology, what sustainable beekeeping is, or IPM, which is a short form for integrated pest management. So this might be of interest, or you might have heard of this terminology before if you're a beekeeper or if you do any kind of lawn management. We also talk about some of our hive products that are available to be purchased in different locations in Toronto, so pollen, honey, and we talk a little bit in this presentation about forage, so what bees eat and what their diet consists of. So a little bit about our story, Bee Local 416, and why we keep bees in Toronto. Because the future depends on sustainable agriculture. As many of us now know and are more aware more than ever with COVID and related supply chain issues, our food chain is fragile. It's become a big business agriculture, and there's been a movement, more grassroots in the last 5 to 10 years of, eating local, supporting local, but that movement I think is definitely picking up steam. And so Bee Local was founded on those principles of, wanting to do sustainable agriculture within the city. Joseph lives himself, the founder, within the city and takes care of bees within rooftops, different backyards. So they're cared for by different registered beekeepers, including myself, sometimes volunteer bee students. A team of people take care of our bees. And our philosophy is, based on sort of an old environmental adage of think globally, but act locally. So even within urban centers, people have opportunities to do something for bees. So one of the locations this is actually a view from one of the locations of one of the rooftop honeybee hives. So bees are kept, they don't need a lot of space. They do need a lot of sunshine, just like a lot of plants. They're very sun loving, so they need warmth, they need protection from like cold winds, and they really need access to water and, just away from different hazards like, ice or things like that, or falling trees would be good. So urban environments are actually, quite good for bees to live in. So the next slide in the section here, we can talk a little bit about honeybee biology. In this slide here, you can see different stages of bees. So that's a natural honeycomb. You have adult female bees making up the majority of the bees. And then underneath the open caps, you can see those C-shaped larvae, which are pupa or, different stages of bees. In some of the black sort of honeycombs, you might see, if you looked a little closer, if we had better lighting, small eggs. So this is a typical brood, what we call a brood frame in a honeybee hive, or where they would make babies, so the nursery of the beehive. And so we'll talk about how bees are actually made. And this video kind of goes through it a little bit here. So I'm just going to play a short video here, and hopefully you can enjoy this introduction to bee biology.
The honeybee is one of the most collaborative insects in the world. Each hive is comprised of thousands of bees working together in order to build and sustain a colony. Within the colony, each bee has a specific role to play, a job, if you will. These are jobs like foraging for food, tending to young larvae, and building a honeycomb. But with a brain about the size of a sesame seed, it begs the question, how do bees know what specific job they need to do in order to keep balance in the hive? The answer is written into the genetic makeup of each bee. And it starts with the queen bee, who has the unique ability to designate the sex of her children, which plays a pivotal role in their future. If the queen wants to lay a female egg, she will fertilize the egg by releasing spermatozoa that is stored in the spermatheca, which sits behind her ovaries. The spermatheca is filled during her first week of life, when she mates with up to 20 drones, or male bees. If the queen wants to lay a male egg, she will not release any spermatozoa as the egg leaves the ovaries. And drones have a singular job. That job is to mate with queens from other colonies to propagate the species. When they're not trying to mate, they eat leisurely from the honey reserves and wait for a queen to go on her nuptial flight. Female bees, or worker bees, do literally everything else. They keep the cells clean, care for the larvae, build cells, tend to the queen, store honey, forage, pollinate, guard the nest, and even feed male bees honey if they're begging for it. Each bee knows what to do because their hormones activate the part of their genetic makeup that tells them what jobs they have to tackle and when they have to tackle them. They go through 4 phases of jobs before dying. In phase 1, bees go to work immediately after they emerge from metamorphosis, about 3 weeks after they're born. They begin cleaning the cells from which they emerge. After about 3 days, their hormones shift them into nursemaid mode. In this job, they feed the young brood that succeeds them. This lasts for about a week. Then phase 3 kicks in, and the workers become general handymen, moving farther away from the center of the hive and doing things like building honeycomb, storing food, and guarding the nest entrances. This lasts about a week. The final phase is the most dangerous. It's the foraging phase, where workers leave the nest to find pollen to bring home and feed the colony. This phase starts around day 41 and lasts until about day 50. After a short life of constant work, most workers will leave the nest as death approaches. Corpses of those that die inside the hive are carried out by undertaker bees. It's a thankless life for the worker bee, but this collaboration and process has made them one of the most successful superorganisms in nature.
So there you see a quick video. There's more about that on National Geographic, but it just gives you a quick overview about how bees are made and an introduction to the importance of how they work through their life cycle. And as a beekeeper, knowing the life cycle of bees is very important, because when we learn how to manipulate and check a hive, the timing of when we can go back and into a hive is very important. So we had a question here. Normally this chat was, or this presentation is geared towards a participative audience, but if you had to guess, how many people, often actually as a beekeeper at markets in different places, people will say, how many honeybees do you hive? And it's a really difficult question to answer sometimes because it fluctuates. So basically, within the season, even the season within summer, peak summer, there might be up to 80,000 bees in a hive, but then in the spring, when they're just coming through winter, there might only be just 8,000. So they really have the ability to adjust their population based on the resources that are available and based on the season as well. But it is quite surprising when it's like looking at a jelly bean and trying to guess how many jelly beans are in a jar. When you look at a beehive, it's really hard sometimes to guess how many bees are there. Sorry, I'm just going to advance to the next hive. Oops, that went too far. So again, that video explained that there's different drones, different types of bees, like the drones are the male bees, the worker bees are the female bees that make up the majority of the hive. And then there's the one special bee in the hive, which is a queen bee, who is fed a special diet, and she has the shortest lifespan because she's the most important from a reproductive standpoint. As you noted in the beehive, she's the one who decides whether to lay a fertilized egg or a non-fertilized egg. And so in the summer, she ramps up by laying more fertilized eggs to increase the worker population to be at their peak when all this stuff right now, like we have in bloom, so that the force is full when they're collecting all the available resources when all the gardens are in full bloom. So right now they're still growing in population in spring. The queens laying up to sometimes 2,000 to 8,000 eggs a day. So, and the next video or here, I think it's a video, we'll show you a little bit about the queen honeybee and why she's important. Oops, sorry. That's not a video, sorry, that was just a photo, my apologies. And then here's a video, or a photo of worker bees. And you can kind of see in the middle there's the queen bee, and this is the video here. And then it talks a little bit more about the different castes, or if you will, or different bees that make up the beehive. Oh, we don't have the volume. Oh, sorry, there is no volume for this one. It was just to show you, try to find the queen bee. So there you see the queen bee is marked. She's a little bit larger than the worker bees. Her abdomen is longer, like it mentioned in the video. And it's very important as a beekeeper to train our eyes to learn how to find a queen on a frame. And sometimes we mark them then with these painted markers representing the year in which a queen is born. So there's a bit of an acronym: will you raise good bees, representing each colors, like red for will, white for red, will, red for the will you raise good bees. And then so that way we know which year they're born in based on a chart that we keep as beekeepers. So it also makes them visually easier to find when we're in the hive. So we mentioned talking about sustainable beekeeping and why that's important, because bees, as you know, or many of you might already know, are really at risk. Their populations have really rapidly declined from an environmental perspective over the last several decades. And so many beekeepers are focused on sort of natural beekeeping methods, and Bee Collaborative as one, and so is Bee Local in Toronto. And we focus on using just organic treatments and trying to find ways to treat bees that are less chemically harsh. They're already sort of assaulted by herbicides and pesticides and have had to adapt to really harmful environments. And so we really want to keep those things free and out of the hive as much as possible. But unfortunately, bees are inundated with pests and diseases, including the varroa mite, which is it's almost like a big, large tick that bees attach to bees and spread diseases and make them very sick, and really can devastate bee populations and beekeeping operations. And so it's really important to manage. In this picture here, you see us managing how to monitor the mites and how to count how many there is, maybe, or estimate how many there might be. Bees that are healthy can sustain a certain load, just like a healthy dog can maybe, take one tick bite. But if he had 20 ticks on him and you didn't do anything, well, your dog is obviously going to suffer. And so bees are very similar. They're livestock, and we treat them similar to you would your dog, and we want to give them the best treatment possible. So I'm just going to go forward a little bit more about that on why we chose that method of treating them. And these are just some of the diseases that bees are actually trying to fight off. Wax moth is one that infests the actual honeycomb. American foul brood is a very deadly bacterial disease that can survive, very cold temperatures and can live on bee equipment that's 40 years old. And so there's all kinds of things that, beekeepers are almost scientists, but they're more as well, because they're looking at, diagnosing issues, and they're almost like doing autopsies every spring. And so these are many of the diseases that, over time, just bees have accumulated from having to, environmentally adapt to different environments, both moisture within the hive or, bacteria that's just naturally found in the environment, etc. So these are different ways that we control pests. This might be familiar again to gardeners in your group. Cultural controls, physical controls, chemical controls. They're all different methods that we use to try to manage those pests and diseases that bees are assaulted with. Ideally, we want to try to use best management practices that maximize bee health and minimize the risks of diseases spreading. So that's a large focus of Bee Local's objectives. And we also tried, like an example of this is using young queens, replacing the queens with healthy bred queens, using fresh equipment every year, tracking that we're not using old equipment just to save money, but that we're allowing the bees to have a good environment. Just like you wouldn't allow your house to come into disrepair, we have to maintain the hives that bees live in every year as well. So there's many aspects that we might not think of when we manage bees, but the rewards of beekeeping are the products that we get from bees and the value of them. So some of the things that we collect from bees that are valuable to us and that, have very many health benefits and whatnot, as bee pollen is one of them. 3 out of 4 crops across the globe that are produced, fruits or seeds for human use, need pollination and need pollen. And bees basically take pollen from plants, because plants don't have legs and wings. So plants take the pollen from plants and transfer them over so that we can enjoy things like watermelon out of season, or fruits and vegetables that we get at the grocery store. So if we didn't have bees, the aisle at the grocery store would definitely look different. So just a quick review on why pollination is important. They collect, I think this is a lesson we all learn maybe in public school, but we can all do with reviewing it. I know when I was an adult and became a beekeeper, I was fascinated again with how amazing plants are, but bees are really an integral part with, obviously some plants are wind pollinated and don't need bees to propagate. But when we understand how many crops are dependent on bees pollinating them, and the knock-on effect that if bees disappear from the environment, like there's places now in China where they have to hand pollinate a lot of plants because the environment is so thick with, pollution and stuff. So, overpopulation and habitat loss is a real problem everywhere. This is the result of what you would see in spring with a disease that we talk about called nosema, and it gives bees the runs, unfortunately. So here you can see sort of fecal matter that looks like sort of yellow drippings all on the front of the winter cover. And then you can also see pollen, and they're bringing in fresh pollen on the legs. If you look a little bit closer, there's bees bringing in fresh pollen that we collect through a very clean method. Not, this is the pollen that they use in the spring, but in the summer, as things go on, we collect pollen that you can then use for your own health purposes. But here's a short video as well explaining or showing just bees bringing in pollen in the spring and how much they need it to bring in to raise babies. So you can see how many worker bees are focused by all the yellow legs coming in on just bringing in as much pollen as possible. So pollen and pollen producing plants in the spring are very important ways you can support bees. Planting native plants and shrubs, native trees that flower. And again, you might not realize, but within, I'm going to just skip past what honey is, because I think you guys probably know what honey is. But there's a definition of it there that you could read through. It's gathered from honeydew and nectar, and then bees actually process it. There's a chemical process that they do, taking the moisture from all the nectar and then fanning it down with both their body heat and fanning their wings to a certain moisture content, and then capping it off so that it doesn't spoil or go bad. So fermented honey, creates mead or alcohol, but bees would then get sick on that. So they store honey at a specific temperature, just like we would store food in a pantry, that makes it keep over winter. And so it's quite fascinating how they've got it down to a science. So here you see a beekeeper in a field working colonies. I believe that's Ontario Beekeeping Association Paul Kelly video here that I can play for you, and it'll just talk a little bit about more of the product of honey. So we talked about pollen, but this shares a little bit more about honey.
Honey is oh so sweet, but if sugars are added and not declared on the label, that is a form of food fraud. Canadians love their honey. In 2019, Canada produced 80 million pounds of honey, worth $173 million, and we imported another $45 million worth of honey. As part of our work to test food for authenticity, the CFIA tests honey samples for added sugars. Testing done in 2019 and 2020 showed 93% of samples tested were authentic. The rest of the samples tested had added sugars that didn't meet regulatory requirements. From these latest efforts, we prevented more than 83,000 kilograms of adulterated honey from being sold in Canada.
At CFIA, we have two different types of sampling. Monitoring sampling, which is random. It's used to establish baseline data and to identify areas of risk. Then we have targeted sampling, and that's generally based on a history of noncompliance, on gaps in preventative controls, and unusual trading patterns. So in general, CFIA will test honey for added sugars, but also residues and contaminants, and also test to make sure that it complies with the regulations and standards. For this targeted survey, we focused on authenticity. Only pure honey can be labeled and sold as honey in Canada.
When we do find honey that is not authentic, we have the authority to respond in a number of different ways. We could seize, detain, or remove the product from Canada, or it could be thrown out. We can also work with our partners at the Canadian Border Services Agency to put in place what we call a border lookout for non-compliant products. In addition, the CFIA could recommend prosecution of companies that sell or import adulterated food products, or we could revoke import licenses. CFIA carries out inspection, compliance, and enforcement activities to protect consumers from deceptive practices and to maintain a fair marketplace for industry. But consumers also have a role to play. Check labels to see if information may be misleading and contact companies directly to ask questions.
Whether you purchase your honey in-store or online, we all have a role to play. Visit our website to learn more and check out the latest report on our honey testing at inspection.gc.ca/food fraud.
So that's another reason why, unfortunately, honey prices have gone up and why it's difficult for beekeepers to make a living, honestly, because they can't compete with a lot of the larger big box type of operations that are then diluting honey. There's a really good program. I think it's I can't remember the name of the documentary. Anyway, I think it's on Netflix that talks about more about honey food fraud. But ways you can support then beekeepers and bees is to make sure that you're supporting a known beekeeper, so someone locally, someone who knows that you know where your product comes from. So, and then reading the labels, as the video said, is important as well. So if you see in the grocery store honeys that are not from this country or from the province, there's a likelihood that it might have been blended with other honeys, and then you don't know the standards of that honey quality, whether it's been mixed with maybe cane sugar or beet sugars or other things, just to kind of make it more profitable. So at Bee Collaborative, I can assure you it's all real authentic honey collected within the boundaries of the Toronto area, within the neighborhoods that the hives are placed, because bees can only forage, and brings us to our next section, from where they're placed about 5 to 8 kilometers. So within 5 to 8 kilometers circular radius of that hive is as far out as they can fly to get whatever they need from their diet. So where they find bees and what they sort of forage on in Toronto, this is just basically a lot of the plants that you may just walk by every day and not know of, or you might know very well if you're a gardener. But you can find them in ditches, in ravines, just in natural places, in parks as well. But in the top there you have lots of asters, which are very popular flowers for bees to visit and different pollinators to visit. Goldenrod is a native plant of Ontario that is a very good resource in the fall for bees, and they collect quite a bit of pollen that gets them, I think, through the winters as well. Willow is a good source of spring pollen. Staghorn sumac, which you'll see all the time on highways. Often you'll see those big red, sort of looks like almost like antlers, and then they're fuzzy. Sumac is another prolific source of both pollen and nectar, actually, when it flowers for bees and different pollinators. Not pictured in this set here is milkweed, which you would have heard of as well as a host plant for monarchs. It's a very important plant. Here in Muskoka, it's very prolific, but we are seeing a lot of habitat loss, as we cut down parking lots and make, more condos available. So if you see milkweed in ditches and ravines in Toronto, cherish it, grab those seeds. It's definitely good stuff for lots of different pollinators. Sweet clover, which is on lawns and maybe people try to get rid of, is also a good source of nectar for lots of different bees and pollinators. Other different things that people think of as weeds, like dandelions, are also great sources of pollen and nectar. Joe pie weed, blue weed, thistle, all great different resources for different pollinators. And these are all pictures that this is not exhaustive. There's non-native plants and native plants. Bees are not fussy. They'll enjoy a good buffet, but they're generalist pollinators, so they'll go wherever the food is. Peonies are one of my favorites, just for the ant and the collaboration story, but also great resource for nectar once the summer gets going. And then another place that you might not think of that bees visit, and you may see them in their garden, and they could be a bee local bee that collects your honey that's available in the grocery store, are residential properties, so right in people's own backyards. So many of the hives that Bee Local 416 keep are actually in residential backyards. Some are on, rooftops, but some are also just in more residential neighborhoods where there's really old growth trees and, different like sunflowers. Bees love sunflowers. But one thing that we don't often think of within the urban center is the urban tree canopy. It is such a great resource, and especially in the city where, you have such old ancient trees like basswood is a great tasting honey. It has kind of a minty, distinctive flavor. But, even our distinctive red maple in the early spring, it's a great resource of nectar for pollinators. So many things right now up here north of the city area, and might already be out of bloom now in the city, but crab apples and apples, hawthorns all in bloom right now. Black locust is another great tree resource. So if you're thinking about, trees to plant, or how can I plant things on my property that would benefit pollinators, these are all great suggestions of things, or you can just go into your local landscape or garden center and ask about pollinator friendly plants. But just also make sure that they're not treated with anything or seed treated beforehand, that they are neonicotinoid free. So that's a thing to be aware of as well. So again, more trees that are available that bees dine on in the city. Cherry and horse chestnut is one of my favorite, just because of the beautiful pollen that they bring in from it is like a bright pink or red color. And so it's fun when we collect the pollen, when we see the horse chestnut pollen coming in. So that's just some resources. If you wanted to learn more about bees, you could take a screenshot of those things, where the sort of videos come from. There's lots more resources online. Joseph's often doing things, activities at, I think it's Terry's, where he might do tastings, and you can ask local beekeepers questions at your local markets. If you're curious, then they're usually happy to answer any of your questions about bees. But that's hopefully some little sort of introduction to where bees really thrive in the city and how you can help them. And that's Bee Local 416, a little bit about why we do what we do.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I find it, you were talking about milkweed, which for a long time seemed to be almost extinct. And so many of these other plants, I had sumacs taking over my backyard. People see these, as unwanted, and yet it's part of the ecosystem. And so the information getting out there that, hey, look, we need these. So
yeah, well, and I mean, it's all about perspective, obviously, depending on where you're coming from, this whole idea of even invasive versus non-invasive, and native versus non-native plants. I mean, bees are non-native to North America, but then we've brought in so many non-native plants so that, there is a symbiosis that eventually happens. And, but yeah, it's an awareness. It starts with an awareness of even just the plants that surround you in your own neighborhood, and looking for the things that are on them, like finding the bees and where they're visiting, and in your own garden, and seeing, why they, what they might be visiting it for. Because they definitely all the plants have benefits for the bees and different pollinators as well.
That's good. The other thing I'm noticing is that lawns are falling out of favor, and that's usually the chief source of clover. So
that's right.
Might come in.
Yeah, there is a trend actually growing of clover lawns, even as people are, doing backyard beekeeping and backyard chickens and backyard kind of homesteading. Letting lawns grow wild, and even different municipalities are doing things like No Mow May to help the dandelions kind of be out there for pollinators, and recasting the poor dandelion weed into more favorable light has been definitely an objective of beekeepers for a while now. So
is there a partnership with schools that you are taking or currently have right now?
Bee Local definitely does work with school boards and does educational talks. We just did one recently for Earth Day, kind of Earth themed week in April. We were speaking to Catholic School Board, I believe it was. So yeah, you can contact, again, I can put up that slide, but Joseph, or info at, Bee Local 416, if you wanted any more information about how to connect educational programs in schools, for sure. Yeah. Sorry, all the talking now has me have a little frog in my throat.
Oh, that's right.
Okay. Get yourself some water.
I will.
Yeah.
Hydrate yourself.
There's many ways that you can help. I mean, there's ways you can sponsor hives through Bee Local, but you can also just support by buying, Bee Local honey.
Mm-hmm.
There's also tasting events that Joseph does, which I found really fascinating, because even one of the things that's really unique about Bee Local is they collect the honey and separate it by neighborhood. So depending on what neighborhood the honey is collected from, it has a very unique flavor, color, and taste profile. So, and again, it goes down to where those bees live and what they collect in their neighborhood. So they naturally represent the neighborhood in which they live. So it can't get more local than Bee Local honey, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there was somebody who used to come to the apple tree market at June Orleans Park here in the neighborhood on Tuesdays. I haven't seen them yet. I'm hoping they'll come back. But yes, they had all kinds of bee products. I tried the bee pollen. I found that quite good.
I like the way it tastes. I think it tastes like gelato, but it's not everybody's cup of tea.
Well, it's fun to sprinkle on stuff, in salad.
Makes it colorful.
So people can go to your website and then find out what's involved in sponsoring a hive.
Correct.
that-
Yeah. So belocal416.ca. And then, yeah, I could put up the screen again, but you could just Google belocal416. You'll find out more information. There's more videos. If you were interested in contacting them to have, for a school or something, another project, you can definitely follow up with him.
Okay. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's lots of things going on in the city that we don't even see
I know there's
right under our noses.
one of our people is involved in so many local fruit trees are not grown for fruit. They were just always there, and then the crab apples fall off, and so he's been involved in harvesting those with the
Oh,
owners
nice.
forest. So yeah, there's a lot of, and then there's blackberry bushes and all sorts of things around. So
Well, thank a pollinator for all that fruit then, all the free fruit around the city.
I will. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. I hope you found it interesting.
I did. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Good.
And
Great.
hope thank you everyone for coming. I hope you can join us next week. We have Michael Johnson, who will be talking about the Canadian peacekeeping forces that were founded in 1956 and what they've had to deal with and encounter, being soldiers who aren't quite soldiers. So that I hope you can join us then.